How you doing, everyone? Andy Parati here with another edition of Atlanta News First Investigates. Behind the investigation, joining me now is my colleague, Chief Investigative Reporter Brendan Keefe. How you doing, Brendan?
Hi, good to see you, Andy.
So this week's investigation behind the scenes of your story is really fascinating. I think the whole story is told through this body camera and the interrogation. Tell me a little bit more about no knock, no warrant nightmare.
Yeah, imagine you're sitting in your home, you're sleeping or you're watching TV, and all of a sudden, there isn't even a knock at the door. Someone just turns the knob and comes in with a gun drawn and a flashlight pointed down your hallway, and they yell, "Oh, by the way, we're the police." They're there without a warrant, they're there without any exigent circumstances, and they put handcuffs on you and take you into custody because they think you don't live there even though you've paid the rent. This actually happened to a man in Roswell, and then his roommate came home and they detained him too, and they detained him even after one of the officers realized it was a mistake.
Let's take a look.
Roswell Police, if you're inside, make yourself known now.
No knock.
Roswell Police, come to the sound of my voice. You sure the door closed? So did I.
No warrant.
Hey, man, come. Show me your hands.
We got contact.
Show me your hands. Manos arriba.
Were you afraid? ¿Tuviste miedo?
Sí, tuve miedo.
Yes, I was afraid, I was scared because of that time of night.
Por su vida? For your life?
Ajá.
Keep going. Keep going. Aquí ahora.
Officers forced Mario Melgar from his apartment at gunpoint and took him into custody.
Get him out of the way.
¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? Why? Why?
Pues no sé porque...
Well, I don't know because they put the handcuffs on me for nothing.
7, right? 1 to 10.
How can the police come into your home without a warrant when you've done nothing wrong?
Pues lo mismo me...
I am asking myself the same thing because I really have no idea why.
Someone lives? Is it supposed to be vacant? It's not supposed to be vacant. Okay.
The officers with a specialized unit were looking for squatters in vacant apartments in June of last year. A broken window attracted their attention.
Someone's got a TV. It looks like someone's living in here. TV, couches.
This is 100% supposed to be vacant?
About 90% sure.
The armed entry team had their doubts from the beginning.
Looks pretty furnished. Told you I can go confirm. You go confirm before we go further into this.
Detective Charles Craig checked the rent roll again and again.
Just a bunch of squatters, but I don't think this is going to be related.
That apartment was listed as occupied and fully paid up on rent.
You live here? You live here? Yeah. Okay, show them vacant.
Even after Detective Craig checked the list, Mario and his roommate Marco were detained as suspects.
Pero tienes derechos. You have rights.
Exactamente.
Exactly.
The rent roll that you're referring to, the document that you were checking for vacancies on, where did you receive that document from?
I got it from the property manager.
Both Detective Craig and the officer with the ballistic shield and gun just inside the apartment received paychecks from the city and from the apartments.
Did you know Officer Craig worked for this apartment complex as an extra job?
No.
I didn't know anything about that.
When a private business hires an off-duty police officer, they get more than just the person. They also get the police uniform, the officer's badge, the officer's gun, their arrest rights, and in some cases, on-duty loyalty to their off-duty employer.
And were these searches or were these patrols of vacant apartments requested by the property managers?
No, not that time.
And they put that on the vacant list?
But one of the officers that night reported management of the complex had requested Craig periodically check vacant apartments for squatters.
I f***ed up. I read the list wrong. It wasn't their list that was wrong. I read it wrong.
We don't know how much money the apartments paid any of the officers because the Roswell Police Department doesn't track off-duty hours or pay.
How long after that time when you realized this apartment wasn't on the list of vacant apartments did you finally release the person who was in handcuffs?
Too long, 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. And during that 10 to 15 minutes, if you had to estimate, how many more times do you think you lied to try to save face during that interaction with the officers and the person who was handcuffed?
Multitude on the same thing to try to save face and try to make it go away.
And the detective faked a phone call to the property manager.
And the phone call
Never happened.
never happened.
I don't understand. They're supposed to be here?
Yeah, they're good. They live here.
Mario and Marco were released with an apology.
When we determined the officer lied, he was told that he was going to be terminated and he quit before he was fired.
Es suficiente? Is that enough?
Creo que no es suficiente.
That's not enough because besides, it wasn't just him.
Do you feel safe here now? ¿Seguro?
No.
¿Qué quieres cambiar? What would you like to see changed?
I would like them to be more careful
Tengan cuidado.
To be careful.
Ajá.
Take more care.
or that they check first
Show me your hands. Manos arriba.
So that type of things don't happen again.
Get him out of the way.
All right, Brendan. This is difficult to watch and incredibly frustrating when you hear that officer say that he repeatedly lied. He said, or in your piece, you said that the gentleman, he ended up resigning before before the investigation ended. What's the situation? Is he working in another police department? Can he work in another police department?
That's a good question, Andy. So yes, he can work at another police department because his Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training certification is still active. There appears to be an ongoing investigation based on our review of his post file. That's his certification file. But as of right now, he could get another job as a police officer. He did resign in lieu of termination, which is exactly what it sounds like, where you resign, and if you don't resign, you were going to get fired anyway.
I mean, can you imagine hiring this guy to your police department and he goes on the stand and they find out about this story and he's cross-examined and you later learn that he's lied in the past? How can he be a useful officer for any agency when you have this background?
That's why they take truthfulness so seriously. Any police department, I've covered a lot of stories in Roswell. Roswell did the right thing here. That's not my opinion, that's just analysis. What I mean to say is they suspended him, they did a thorough investigation, they got all of the other people in. In fact, it was a commander reviewing the body camera who first raised the issue of, hey, there might be some Fourth Amendment violations here, which is your protection against illegal search and seizure. And so it was the police department that actually blew the whistle on itself here, and they deserve credit for that. And truthfulness is a very big thing. Same thing with Georgia Post. When they do an investigation, it's very rare they let someone keep their certification once they determine that there were lies or at least a lack of candor.
In that internal affairs interview, you hear the guy acknowledging that he faked a phone call to the property manager. How did you know that? How that all happened?
Yeah, I've got to also give credit to the internal affairs investigator, Major Greco. He's a very skilled interviewer. And police officers, it's important to point out, when they're interviewed not under, what would you call, they're interviewed under something called Garrity. And those Garrity rights are different than your Miranda rights. And the reason is, it's not just the police department, they're also your employer if you're a police officer. And so there has to be a way to interview an employee in an administrative investigation without them having to give up their right to remain silent. So it was this case called Garrity. And none of that can be used against you in a criminal court if you're interviewed under Garrity. It's an important distinction, and it's unique to police officers and police departments. But what happened was Major Greco, when interviewing this officer, Officer Craig, he was able to have some information from fellow officers that, hey, they saw you with the phone up to your ear, but they could see the home screen displayed. And if someone says they're on a phone call and you see the home screen, it is possible if you've got, you've hit the home screen button, it's very unusual. And so they looked a little further into it, they checked phone records, and then ultimately in the interview he said the phone call never happened. And he was doing it because he was embarrassed in front of his fellow officers. But you hit on a key point, Andy, which is if he's on the stand in another case, there are arrests that happened before he lost his job. He would have to testify in those cases. A good defense attorney can say, hey, you lied when it suits you, when it was to protect yourself. How do we know you're not lying now to put my client in prison?
Yeah, that's a really good point. You got to really feel for those guys, Mario and Marco, the roommate, having to be detained like that for no reason. Do they still live there? Have they thought about filing a lawsuit? Could they file a lawsuit?
Yeah, so actually there is an attorney working with them right now. There are some limitations. And then there's also the apartment complex, which we didn't name in the story because our focus was more on the systemic failure of officers working second jobs and whether that causes ethical conflicts that has them do things on duty that they wouldn't normally do for just any private business, like enforcing the rent roll. Mario left and moved to another apartment. Marco stayed, but Marco recently reached out to me because he was having problems getting another apartment because he said that his rental record was somehow negatively affected by this. We haven't been able to verify that at this point. That's just what he told us because he wanted our story to actually be used as sort of a reference for him to get another apartment. We did the interview in that very same apartment. So it was very prescient for them, the feelings that they had that night, because they're in the very same place where it happened. And then, of course, I had to do the interview in Spanish. I'm not quite conversational. I'm close. But I insisted on doing the interview in Spanish to meet them where they are because they don't speak English. I thought it was important to give them that deference. They're immigrants from Honduras, and they do believe that their immigrant status played a role in the way they were treated by police.
Wow. Because this is called Behind the Investigation, I kind of want to know a little bit more, and I'm hoping you can tell our viewers, how did you find this investigation? How did you learn about this?
Yeah, my best sources are actually good cops, cops who have integrity. It's interesting because a lot of times people think that we have a bone to pick with police or that we're going after them. The opposite is true. What we're actually trying to do is hold police officers who break the law accountable, also police departments and police systems accountable when people's rights are violated. And amazingly, these stories come directly from good cops with integrity who have tried through the chain of command very often to get these resolved. And when they can't, they come to us, almost like whistleblowers. This particular source was the same source who'd given me several other Roswell stories. It is important to note that Roswell has done a much better job than it did a few years back when I had done a series of investigations that resulted in the previous police chief retiring and a couple of police officers getting fired. Now they're doing much more accountability. An investigation like this 5 years ago may not have even risen to the level of an internal affairs investigation. In this case, it was a very well-conducted one.
Well, Brendan, thank you again for walking us through this very important investigation. No knock, no warrant, nightmare indeed. Thanks again, Brendan.
Thanks, Andy.